Hello, folks. Welcome back to WW2 TV, and we're beginning our Torch to Tunis series, which is about 3 weeks of content coming your way. The Michael Nyberg show that was scheduled for today, we're postponing it a few days. He was traveling, and we got a bit confused with dates. We'll get that one in later on. That'll be about the politics. But we're starting off with a show with another content creator. We are kicking off the series with Sasha Maggio, who has been bringing 1942-43 history to a wider audience via her Why We Fight podcast. Before I bring Sasha in, just a reminder, we've had a lot of new people coming to our channel the last few days, which is fantastic. If you haven't yet clicked the subscribe button, make sure you do that. Make sure you click the little bell so you receive notifications, and everything you need is always in the description below. That's where you can open up and find links to my guests' websites, their books, their podcasts, their social media links, and you'll find where to get yourself some snazzy WW2 TV merchandise, etc., etc. But I'm going to bring Sasha in now. So, good evening. How are you today, Sasha?
I'm surviving. How are you?
Allergies, isn't it? Allergies. Yeah, and I'm good.
They're terrible, yeah.
So, we've both been researching this period of history, kind of the back end of 1942 into 1943. And, we'll talk about your podcast later on. But our first little discussion is going to be why should we be talking about the 42-43 period, and why are we not talking about it? So I'll hand that to you. Why should we be talking about it?
Well, because there was so much, at least from an American perspective, we did an awful lot of learning during this period, and we, I think that we are inherently overconfident sometimes, and it's with good reason. I mean, we do succeed a lot of the time when we do things, so the confidence isn't misplaced, but we in this situation we definitely needed we had a little bit of a learning curve. But I know that there are a lot of especially with modern military, we need to see what that learning curve kind of looks like, so that we can, I mean, it's good for realistic expectation management when we're working on things. It's also good for training and exercises.
It's like when I was a kid doing the maths exams at school, when you had to show you're working out. It's all very well having a result. And the result, of course, is that by 1945, the Allies have convincingly defeated the Third Reich and the Japanese Empire. But the 42-43 period is the working out how to do it, working out how to take war to an enemy that has, in both theaters, expanded itself beyond what we could have imagined several years earlier. The British, the Americans, the Canadians, we're all up against it. We're developing new techniques. We're building our defenses. We're building our armaments. And the 42-43 period was pretty. Let's talk about July. Let's talk about July 1942, because that was when the first meeting in London, when the combined chiefs gathered to talk about what eventually became Operation Torch, and there were various other possibilities that were considered. But July 42, the PQ-17 convoy to Russia had gone, the convoy had gone badly wrong. The Arctic convoy is going wrong. Malta is under siege. The Germans are on their way to Stalingrad. Tobruk fell to the Germans for a second time in June. The bomber command offensive isn't going terribly well. The Japanese are still, holding most of the Pacific theater.
Yeah.
It was a bleak time, wasn't it? Remind us, from your point of view, from educating the current military and the people who follow you, why we should be looking at those dark days. Again, I'm not repeating ourselves, but it's important to understand it was a dark period.
Well, for me, I mean, I understand, like everybody, I think I knew what the headlines were, right? I knew the major events, but the North Africa campaign, I did not know much about. So researching that was important to me, but I knew that we didn't get there until the end of 42. And so I was like, well, when, and I mean, we can talk about my series later, but when I started to continue, when I realized I was going to continue and I was going to take it year by year, I was like, this is a good opportunity for me, because I can shape my own research to learn more about the things that I don't know about. And I hadn't actually, I knew that Operation Torch was the first real engagement with the European Axis powers, sort of, but it wasn't, I didn't realize that how, even knowing it was in November of 42, I didn't realize how long that was. And so I wanted to know, well, what was going on before then? And finding out that we had already deployed troops to the UK, I think in January of 42. I mean, like right away, I was like, well, what were they doing? You know, they're training and they're doing exercises and they're preparing. They're also kind of like relaxing a little bit. So it's like, but I didn't know what was going on all year.
No, it's difficult, but I mean, we will talk about your podcast and your social media content a bit later when you've got a PowerPoint. But just for the people who don't know who you are, your Mother of Tanks is your handle on various social media outlets, things like that. But how did it come to be? Did you tell the various organizations you work for that you want to do this? Did they ask you to do it? And so tell us what your day job is and how you came about to be creating historical content for, and who you do it, who you create for.
Okay, so at the moment, I'm an analyst for the U.S. Air Forces in Europe, USAFE. It's actually USAFE after Africa, so U.S. Air Forces in Europe and the Air Forces in Africa. But I took that job so I could come back to Europe, so I could work more on this series. And I have other plans. But before that, I was working at the Mission Command Training Program at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. And I'm going to try not to cough while I talk about this.
You can have a quick cough.
Yeah. Thanks. I feel so bad because I was like, of course, now the allergies are going to kick in. So I took the job at MCTP in Kansas right at the start of 2020. And when I got there, so I had to move, I changed jobs, I get there, everybody's working from home. And a lot of the work that we do, so at that time I was working for the Army doing information operations training in the large Army warfighter exercises. So none of this has to do with like my social media content really, and none of it has to do with the history series. It just happens to be what I do so that I can do other things. In order to fill the time working from home, because the work that they could give me for my job, I couldn't do all of it from home for various reasons. And so they gave us some like computer-based training that we could do to fill the time, but we were encouraged to read books or do something that was like professional development. And I was reading a book, The Tank Killers, I think by Harry Yaidi, if I'm saying that right. And in the very beginning of that, he talks about the 1941 GHQ maneuvers. And I was like, well, these sound a lot like the warfighters that we do now, plus the training at like NTC in California and the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana. Plus there's the Multinational Training Center in Germany. And so I wanted to know more about that. And it ended up developing into a series that I thought was only going to be like 2 weeks of daily threads on Twitter talking about the maneuvers, the exercises. And I pitched that to the general in charge of the Combined Arms Center in Fort Leavenworth. And he was like, and I was like, I'd like to run this off the Combined Arms Center account. And he said, okay, he put me in touch with his social media people. They said, we can't give you a daily post. We can give you 2 threads a week. And I was like, 2 threads a week, that's going to break it up kind of weird. So what if instead of that, I take from February, because this was January, I take it from February of 2021 through the end of the year, and I give you 2 threads a week, and we just cover all kinds of Army history, but focusing mostly on 1939 to 1941, because that's that period of modernization, mechanization, and mobilization, where we were really getting ready for the war that we didn't want to fight in the first place, right? You know, a lot of Americans didn't want to do this, but the Army knew we were going to have to, so we had to do something to get ready for it. And so they said, okay, that's what I did. But like 2 months into that, they were like, we'd like you to continue doing this even after this year. As long as you want to keep making content, we'll keep supporting it. And when I realized that instead of ending with the maneuvers, which were in the fall, autumn, I took it to, I decided to take the series through the beginning of December of 2021, covering the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor and the official declarations of war that brought the U.S. into World War II. And then I would take it year by year instead of
I'll take over, let you have a cough for a second.
Yeah.
So and by the way, folks, all the links to Sasha's accounts are in the description below, as I said at the top of the show there, and we're going to try and bring you a few more viewers and listeners. And one of the things that we'll talk about later on is that whether or not it's difficult trying to present history for a broad audience, but also within the remit of the fact that you do work for the military. You have a boss. I don't have a boss. I am my own boss. If I want to present history in the way I want to present it, with a historian who's controversial or offering a different point of view, I can do it. I mean, and you talk about on your show how you focus a lot on the green books and the blue books and the official histories. And is that sometimes a little bit of a challenge, having to kind of stick to a agreed kind of format, or are you allowed to go off piste a little bit?
So initially, I was very, very careful with it. I'm still very careful with it. But initially, they wanted to like preview all my threads before I posted them. So I had to write them in advance and get everything. They wanted to see the pictures. They wanted to see everything just to be sure. Because I mean, I did work for a part of the organization, but I didn't work directly for them. And now here's a 3-star saying, yeah, do it. And his team is going, we don't want to get anybody in trouble. So let's double check everything. But I mean, I completely understood that. And I was very, very careful with it. I had a couple of slips in the first year where, and I won't name names because people that know who he is. A retired 3-star got very upset because I used some GIFs from the movie Stripes, where and he did not understand. He took them out of context and he saw them on the official account and he didn't understand what was going on and he got very, very mad. And so there are 2 threads that are missing because they were taken down. But the Combined Arms Center wasn't mad. They tried to get him to calm down. But he was very, very upset on behalf of the National Guard, who was not upset about it. A National Guard general was consulted and he had no problem with it. So, but, and then another time I was talking about, so when I post the threads on Twitter, I can only post 25 tweets at a time because there's like a limit. And so I have to post up to 25 and I read through them like 3 or 4 times out loud, double checking everything before I hit send on that, right? Before I go for the next batch. Cause I tried to keep it under 25 tweets, but most of them aren't. And at one point in that first year, I hit send, and I didn't realize that people were like retweeting one of the tweets in the thread and kind of giggling about it. And I didn't understand because I kept missing what was there. And I had put LST, which you and I both know is landing ship tank, and I put landing shit tank.
Nice.
And I missed it, and it wasn't underlined in red in Microsoft because Microsoft knows that, hey, maybe that's what Sasha means. And it was in the middle of the thread, so my option was to delete everything after that and redo it, or get them to let me own it.
Yeah.
And I reached out to the public affairs team lead, and he took a couple of hours it was a Saturday. He took a few hours to get back to me. And I worried about that. So I reached out to the general instead. And it is a different general than the first general that gave me the go ahead for this. And it was General Martin. And I said, so here's a mistake. And he goes here. And I said, here are my options. I can delete it and redo it. And then everybody's going to pick on us for doing that. Or you can let me own it as my mistake. And I think people will be a little bit kinder about that. And he said, you know what? Own it. Go ahead. And so he gave me the approval to own it. The public affairs team, when they got back to me, they were like, we'd like you to change it. And I was like, General Martin already said I can just own it.
And the weird thing is that would probably generate the impressions. That's the weird thing about that kind of thing, is that has more potential of going viral. Look how the US military screwed up by saying shit, not ship.
Right.
And that, we will talk about that, how we are trying to, in our different ways, but overlapping, trying to share history. But let's bring it back. Great story, by the way. To
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I got sidetracked.
42 and 43, because when we're talking about tweeting and doing podcasts for serving soldiers and people who are involved in the defense of their country and and overseas, my view is going back to 42, 43, they were, again, I'm repeating myself, they were dark times, that not everything that the Allies were doing then was working. There was some iffy leadership decisions that going on. Their technology was not maybe matching some of the Axis technology that the Allies are facing. There was some strategic decisions that maybe we can look at 80 years on and say were poor. So bringing it up to date, do people who are serving like being reminded that the U.S. Army was not always a finished product, like any army? Is it, or do they kind of embrace the fact that there's a learning curve, or do they kind of prickle at it a little bit?
So everyone that I have talked to that is currently serving, that as long as they're Army or Marines, they really enjoy the content. They enjoy the stories that they didn't know. They enjoy the perspectives. They enjoy the humor, because I do work in humor whenever I can. Unless if it's completely inappropriate, then I don't work in humor, and we can talk about that if you want. But yeah, senior leaders obviously love it. I've been recognized many times for this by senior Army leaders, and they go out of their way to, when they're in an area where they know that I'm there, then they go out of their way to come and tell me how much they enjoy this. So I know that they appreciate it, but it's when the soldiers actually enjoy it and they say, hey, I don't normally like history content. I don't really like how the Army tries to force me to learn history. But I feel like I'm learning something from this, and it's easy to learn something from this. It's not like a chore.
Mm.
So
let's
I
bring it
like
back
that.
again to 42 and what your research taught you about 42 and 43, because we were talking before we went live about the fact that the world we live in today, that there's still threats around the world, but back in 42, the US in the ETO, you were not the major player among the Allies. Britain and the Dominion forces were larger than the US involvement at that stage. It changed later on in the war. The Axis were better than everybody. The Italians and Germans had a lot of power, a lot of influence. As I said, their technology was in some ways better than the Allied. So you were a smaller fish then, so to speak. And with creating the content that we do, I know with my viewing figures, the shows that I do about the end of the war, the 45 or 44 and 45, but D-Day and onwards, people like to hear about a victory. They like to hear about when things were going well. They like the D-Day content. I know it's because D-Day is very, very familiar. People know D-Day more than they know perhaps the invasion of Italy, but they like victories. They like to hear about the Allies kicking ass. And 42 into 43 was not a period where the Allies were kicking ass. Certainly not towards the end of 43. They start, even I guess Operation Torture was successful, but Tunisia campaign had some major ups and downs. So when you went into this, what were the things that really kind of surprised you about the US Army learning curve in the late 42-43 period?
Well, I think so. Knowing the history that I knew when I went into this, I was familiar with some things, so I knew that we didn't always win. But I also know that there are a lot of people that don't. There are a lot of people with this misconception that we had the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then we had America joins the war, D-Day. Maybe they know the Battle of the Bulge, and then we win the war. And they think it was just, there's a couple of years in there that you're skipping.
Yeah.
And, but it's like when I talked in one of my episodes, I talked with Bill Nance, Dr. Bill Nance, and he said it's because a lot of people focus on the headlines and nobody wants to talk about this other stuff. But I'm about to do a recording next week with a couple of very, very, very knowledgeable men and on Sicily. And they said that when I had a conversation with them to prepare for that, they said that the fact that I'm taking 2023 and covering all of 1943 as best I can, they love that because not enough attention goes on 43. And 42, there was a lot of waiting from an American perspective. There's a lot of waiting, a lot of waiting to do things. There was also a lot of disappointment because like Marshall and the American planners didn't want to go focus on North Africa. They wanted to all right, let's deploy to England. Let's go across the channel, kick some German ass, win the war. We'll be home by Christmas, that kind of thing. And it's like, it's not going to be easy. And I think that was, I mean, obviously going into North Africa was a better decision because we didn't have the forces and we didn't have the skills. And we certainly didn't have the coordination. And that's another thing that we're trying to do now is now that we have been in North Africa, see, and I'm going to do this a lot. I'm treating it like we're now in April 1943, right? So now we've been in North Africa for a handful of months. We're still kind of getting the swing of things, trying to coordinate with the Brits. We've got these Free French forces that we've got integrated that don't want to work with the British. They kind of don't want to really want to do. Some of them don't even want to work with each other. And there's, we've got an awful lot of relationship management going on. So it's not just the planning and coordination, but there's a relationship management factor here. And these are things that I hadn't considered before because I am not a political scientist. I'm barely an amateur historian,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like I don't know everything. So I'm learning along the way. And to see this the different stages of this the developments in this coordination process it's to me it's really, really interesting. And it's much more interesting for the overall picture when you see what we had to do to get there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the fact that, the last few years we've faced the challenge of COVID and economy and this, that, and the other, and we've had to do that internationally, working with each other, and it's been some highs and lows in those relationships. And again, the focus on 44 is that when the Allies were working together fairly smoothly, I don't just mean the ETO, but in the Pacific and the Far East as well, the Burma Command, things like that, the 14th Army is starting to work quite well. But in 42, I mean, not even counting Vichy France and Italy, which is a minefield, literally and figuratively, of politics and factions. That, as you said, the American, the British relationship was not at its best because of entirely different aims about how to win the war. As you said, the Americans were pressing for, let's do a second front early. Churchill was no, and it's not just Churchill and FDR, it's all these other figures as well. And so that 42 period, there's the learning curve on the battlefield that we're going to be talking about over these 2 weeks, and you're talking about with your series. But there's also the learning curve of how to deal with each other as nations.
The
British have been in the North Africa since sort of 41 there, with some lows. El Alamein has, we're on the high now. When Torch happens, El Alamein has now, is over or it's nearly over. So the British and the Commonwealth are finally starting to kick ass in North Africa, but that's been a very, very up and down process. And now you're coming over to get involved in a conflict. It's very complicated. So any more things about the 43 period that you want to address before we start talking about your podcast?
There is El Alamein, I think it's just ending and then it goes right into Torch. So there's like barely any overlap there. But the one of the things that I have really tried to regularly emphasize is that throughout the very first series, we were not at war yet. So all that planning and preparation had to be done without an actual declaration of war. And that's something like when we had that massive exercise, which is still the 1941 GHQ maneuvers, this is still the largest exercises the U.S. Army has ever conducted. And they, when we did that, we had to do that without an actual declaration of war. So that was something that was, especially working with the military in an exercise environment, that was really important. And now we're in, now when we finally get to North Africa in November of 42, another thing that I wanted to keep emphasizing is that we were going into an environment where the British had already been fighting for years. And they're tired and they've got experience and they're, it's like, there's going to be some frustrations because we're coming in fresh, and we have to respect that experience and that the sacrifices that the British military had made to that point just to keep going, and so these are things where some of the things that are really important to me are the fact that we are maybe geopolitically, but militarily, because I work with the military, we are definitely better when we work together. And so, like now, and how do we get to now? Because we have a pretty regular interaction with exercises and training, and all sorts of coordination. We also, but I mean, we didn't have that then, and so seeing the beginning of that in the research and some of the threads that I put, because last year I'm still only covering 2 threads a week, right? And so I can't cover every story. This year I started trying to cover every story and add more to like Facebook and Instagram, but adding the podcast kind of chewed up a lot more time than I was anticipating.
And again, that thing you said about the working together is, again, if I keep bringing 1944 in, because that's my bread and butter, is that
Yeah.
the gift wrapped SHAFE organization of it all working seemingly harmoniously with, Eisner and Tedder and Lee Mallory and Monty. I mean, okay, there were trials and tribulations, but the system was pretty much in place. And most people would argue that it functioned pretty damn well for the rest of the war. But the journey of how the British, the American, Canadians got to be able to work like that is really fascinating, because it had some real lows. I mean, going back to Torch, I mean, just the handling of the French and Darlan and Laval and all those people there. Americans and Brits, we didn't quite start a war against each other, but politically our countries were very, very, very it's a difficult time for us.
Well, I forget which of my guests so far has said it, and but I if I think about it long enough, I can figure it out. But all of the different nations, right? So militarily, we have to coordinate, but there's a geopolitical aspect to this that we are now having to navigate, and every single one of the allies wants the war to end the same way, with the defeat of the Axis powers.
Yep.
But we all have a different idea of what the world will look like when the war is over. And we all have different priorities. And when I did my first episode this year talking with Paul Sparrow about the Casablanca conference, and he's talking about Roosevelt there talking with the King of Morocco, like, oh yeah, after the war we'll help you stand up on your own. There's no more colonialism, that kind of thing. And Churchill's there like, what the hell is he talking about? And I made the joke that it's like Churchill's just going to stop inviting him everywhere. But it's like that's what it was, is that we knew that we had to work together, but we weren't fully aware of what the other nations involved, at least not the main allies, what their idea of success would look like at the end.
No, definitely. And Phil Blood, who's watching, and good evening, Phil, is making a point. When we talk about 1943, I'm trying to scroll back and find his comment, but the Germans also, 43 is a big year for them, isn't it? I mean, there are some people that think that, post El Alamein torch, they're broken in North Africa, they're starting to lose on the Eastern Front, and there's a case to be made that they have peaked now, but they are not in any way a broken force for at least another year, 18 months. All through 43 and much of 44, they are still an incredibly dangerous foe. They've taken a couple of body blows, but they've got a big year ahead as well. So we'll bring your PowerPoint up now so we can start, because I feel we're going to just go chatting about all sorts of things, and we'll talk about what you're doing and try and bring you a few more viewers and watchers and what have you. But also we'll go back in the conversation to various elements about 42 and 43. And by the way, Paul Sparrow, who Sasha mentioned, is going to be on our channel in about 10 days time, talking about the same thing, similar things, Casablanca and FDR and Churchill's relationship. And then Mike Nyberg, I say, is going to be covering Vichy and that side of things. And then we're also going to be talking on our panel discussion at the end of the series about France and Italy post-Torch and post-1943 and how different their situation was geopolitically, and there's lots to talk about beyond the battles. But let's talk about Why We Fight, your series, and I'll hand it over to you to just take us through some of your slides, and we'll just have a conversation. I'm enjoying it.
I'm enjoying it too. I do apologize to everybody because I feel like I just sound terrible because of the coughing, but I'll
We
try
haven't
to.
heard one yet. You're right.
That
You're using the mute very successfully. No one would notice.
I'm very good with the mute button. Yeah. So this is the very first series. I called it. Do I have control of this, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So we went through some of this in the very first series. I called "Building an American Army." I did not know that I was going to do another one. So this was I was just planning the end of February. I started right after the first exercise of that year. First exercise that I was working in my actual job. And I decided I was going to take it up to December 11th, which just happened to fall, I think, on a Tuesday. And my threads are on Tuesday and Saturday. And I did say that initially they were reviewing all the threads, but after a short time, they stopped reviewing them. They said, just go ahead, because that's the level of, this is what happens when I demonstrated a level of professionalism that they were comfortable with, and they know I'm not going to do anything that makes them look bad. And if I do, I'm going to fess up to it. So, but the running themes for that very first series were things like, that we were not at war yet, but I also want to show that this is where the current army kind of comes from. And, but when I was going to continue and I decided I was going to take it year by year, I changed the name because I couldn't keep building an American army. I want to talk about the Allies. I want to talk about what the British were doing and what we were doing together, and maybe throw in some air history too. And so I decided to go with Why We Fight, which is the name of, I think it's the name of a series of, they're called propaganda films, but they were films made for the War Department by Frank Capra. And they were basically, a lot of them came out in 1943, and they were to inform the public, but also, boost American morale. I believe all of them are available on YouTube. So if you want links to them, I can find them. But yeah, so last year, 1942, I started from January and went all the way to December. I lost a lot of the audience last year, but it wasn't because of anybody leaving. It was just because there just wasn't a lot of attention on the series. And I mean, it's not like a major country invaded a smaller country or anything like that. So, last year also, the Marine Corps Museum joined me, and they started doing threads on the Pacific Theater. Now, me working by myself, I could barely cover everything that I want to cover. So it was nice of them to do that. And the Land Warfare Center, the British Army's Land Warfare Center, started the year doing threads as well. But with the whole Eastern Europe thing, they public affairs rules changed, and they had to pull out for a while, and they just didn't come back, and that's fine. I think that it was a lot more work, and that's another thing, is that a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into this. I know Paul knows, but it's like, I mean, I spend at least, now this year even more, but last year at least 30 hours a week on content just for 2 threads. And this year, on top of my regular job, it's like 40, 50, 60 hours. So, I mean, I'm easily working 90 or 100 hours a week on counting my regular job in this.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I it's just a few minutes for me every day. It's not at all hours and hours every day, 7 days a week. I don't know what you're talking about. You're making it. No, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
No worries.
Don't make me laugh, Paul.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So, but yeah, I decided to stick with the Why We Fight for 1942 and 43. I don't know if I'm going to change it next year, but I think I'm probably going to carry it through, at least through next year. But I printed this because I know I wouldn't be able to see it on this. But yeah, so this year and last year, I wanted to add the joint and multinational themes to it. So I wanted to tell stories about what we were doing when we worked together and coordinating with each other. So that was something that's a little different. I also have the Center of Military History started to join us last year. And that was kind of a big deal for me because, like, who am I, right? You know, here I am, just this person that worked at the Combined Arms Center, sharing Army history as I learn it sometimes. And now the Center of Military History, who's responsible for all of the Army's history, wants to contribute and support. And I'm like, all right, now nobody supports with money, so I get no funding for this. But I get a lot of attaboy kind of. I get a lot of attaboys, but except, you know, I'm a girl, but whatever. So this year, 1943, let me see what else I'm doing. Why am I doing this? So it is kind of a new approach to history. What Paul does is great. I love these live shows. I apologize that I'm all over the place, but mine are recorded, so I have the luxury of being able to shape everything before anybody sees it. The military history is not just about the Army, and that was another thing that I really wanted to start emphasizing, especially now as we get. So April 1943, we're a couple weeks out from the end of the Tunisia campaign in North Africa, which is why Paul's doing this, and then we're going to focus on Sicily. So now the fighting is going to get to Europe, right? The first Sicily and then mainland Europe, and there's a lot of people there. And I wanted, you know, those are people that are going to be directly affected by the fighting that's going on around them. And plus, there's a lot of changes that are happening on the home front in America, and I wanted to tell those stories too.
And it's interesting because I'm talking to Indy Nidell and Spartacus on their channel, is that when you're trying to do a broad sweeping, trying to not just do things in isolation, but to try and bring things into context, is you're spinning so many plates, because then you think, oh, if I'm bringing in the air power, then I need to bring the home front in, which means I need to bring industry in, which means I need to start bringing shipping in, which means I need to bring the merchant mariners in. And in a sense, as a creator of content, you're faced with the same kind of problem as the planners were facing in 42, 43, and juggling everything at the same time, and therefore prioritizing, you know, which are the important things. Because that's, to me, one of the themes of 42 and 43 is the wherever the Allies are putting their strength, they're taking it from somewhere else. If they put a convoy, I mean, the ridiculous thing that, you know, Royal Naval sailors are going from the tropical whites, doing a convoy into the Mediterranean, straight into the winter clothing to do a convoy to Russia, and then back into the tropical clothing, because we haven't got enough personnel on ships. Their ships are going from theater to theater. And the same with the Americans in the Pacific. If you're putting a big effort in one set of islands, you're taking it away from somewhere else. And that is a bit like creating content. I'm not, folks, saying that waging a war is anything like creating content is anything like waging a war. But in terms of working out what's prioritized, there is a similarity.
Right. No, absolutely. There's so in order for me to do what I do and have it be planned out for the whole year, I stop the series around mid-December, and I spend like 4 weeks planning out the entire year. And for the most part, I stick to that plan, and I rely heavily on momentum to keep going. But it's like I have to give myself options, because the best plans are flexible and adaptable, right? And so I have to give myself options, because what if I get to a day and it just happens to fall in a week where I've got a huge report due in my actual job, and I just don't have the time to do the research and the writing to do that topic justice. I need another option that I can do easier. And so there are some times where I have to make changes like that. And there are occasionally days where I just can't get the thread done. But yeah, it is a lot like that level of planning and coordination. And I don't recommend anybody ever do a series as big as this. Like I'm at the end of this year, I'm hoping to have like a template that I can share, at least with public affairs and historians, so that if they want to scale it down, because it will be scalable, but I've demonstrated that it's repeatable. I'm in my 3rd year doing this, and I'm using the same process, and so I know that my process works. But yeah, it's entirely.
And what's one of the things that's different between what you're trying to do and what I'm trying to achieve is that you are trying to complete sets. You're trying to take subjects from beginning to end and cover all the steps within that. Whereas I can this 2 weeks I'm doing on Torch to Tunis, there are subjects I'm not covering at all because I just, once I got enough guests for the 2 or 3 weeks, I stopped putting the feelers out for guests. I may revisit again in the future, but I didn't feel, and if someone said, well, you're not covering this, no, I'm not covering this aspect, but look what I am covering. So I
Yeah.
can be a bit more flexible, but
So
you have to stick to more of a, you've got to have all the steps in.
Yeah. So when I did when I first started the very first series in 2021, there were a couple of people that initially were like, well, you didn't talk about this, you didn't talk about that. And I asked everybody, I was like, look, I appreciate that you want to offer your constructive criticism right now, but wait until the end, because this is a long series and we're in February and it's going to go through December. So why don't you wait until the end and see what I cover and where the gaps are? And I think that by December they forgot. And so, so that was part of my plan, was just hope that they forget and they leave me alone, because I'm not making content for historians. I'm making content for people that enjoy history, but I'm making content for a very diverse audience, and I'm hoping that some of that audience are people that don't normally like history content, so that I can be like, look, history is not what you think it is. You can, it can be amusing. It's okay to point out things that are like absolutely ridiculous. We have the benefit of hindsight, but so you're talking about where you stop putting feelers out. This is the third year that I've done a year-long series, but it's the first year that I've been able to organize a podcast, which is something that I wanted to do from the beginning. But I knew I would need guests, and I didn't have the appeal in 2021 to get the guests that I needed. And towards the end of last year, I thought, I might be able to do this next year for 43. And I'm glad that I'm doing it for 43, because I took my plan for the whole year and I grabbed 24 topics that I thought were big topics. And I tried to make them as general as possible. And I reached out to CMH and some other individuals, but I started with the Army first because I'm doing this with the Army. And I said, can I get historians who can talk about these topics? I thought 24, I can do 2 a month for the whole year. It'd be great. But those people were very enthusiastic, and they reached out to other people and they were like, hey, do you want to do this? And then I started getting dozens and dozens and dozens of emails. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with these people, but I can't say no to them, because it's like their enthusiasm and they just want to contribute, and they're offering good stories. So I stopped trying to fit them into a box and make them fit into the topics. And I started seeing, all right, what are the stories that you can tell so that you're able to tell it well? And now I'm looking at like possibly 90 episodes by the end of the year. So, yeah.
I mean, it never ends, doesn't it? I mean, one of the shows we've got coming up later in the week with Jeff Danby, it's he's written about one company of one tank battalion. So not even the tank battalion. So not just American Army in Tunisia. It's one company. He has branched out to do a bit about the whole battalion for me, because he realizes that it's a bit niche. But then people say, well, if you're doing B company, you should also, are you going to do a show about A company next week? What about the other, the depth that is possible to go to with this is extraordinary, isn't it? Because you could do regiment by regiment, battalion by battalion, ship by ship, squadron by squadron across the entire theaters. And it brings us back to, again, this idea of just how monumentous the 12 months was, from sort of November 42 to November 43, taking us through Torch, the liberation of Tunis, Husky, and of course all the planning and preparation for the second front. I mean, it was a extraordinarily important 12 months, and again, we're talking about the fact that it doesn't get talked about enough.
I've got a problem where I've got a lot of good ideas, and I think that all my ideas are good, and it's like, I could make that work, but I really should have somebody over me telling me no sometimes, because I won't tell these people no. And so now my series is just ridiculously big, and I am working like 100 hours a week. But them's the breaks. I'm going to make it happen, because to me, I'm not just including random people. It's like everybody has something to contribute, and all of these people either they're experts on the topic, or they're so enthusiastic about the topic and they've done so much research that it's like, yeah, absolutely, let me include you. And so I want us to tell good stories, and I want us to share history. I mean, we got all over the place. I'm not going to make everybody sit through my PowerPoint.
But I mean, the fact is, and you're doing it on to use an Eisenhower. You're on multiple fronts. Now you're using YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, I advertise my shows a bit on Twitter, but it is solely YouTube, and I'm solely pretty much live now. So I couldn't imagine trying to juggle it on all those different social platforms and trying to remember what you've put where and respond to comments and respond to interaction, because I mean, no, I can understand why you spend 100 hours a week at it. I really can.
It's ridiculous. Like, I joke that it's like I do this because I wanted to learn about it, right? And the series allows me to really focus my own research. Like I had here that I had initially thought that it was going to be 24 episodes. Now I think when I updated this, it was 70 plus. I'm looking at 90 plus. So in the first two series, like in the first series, the big thing was the GHQ maneuvers, which was in the fall. And they that was really all I wanted to talk about. So I worked through the whole year to get to that point. And then after that, I talked about what kind of lessons did they pull from the GHQ maneuvers. And then I got into the attack on Pearl Harbor and the official declarations of war. Last year, Operation Torch was the big thing. And that happened late in the fall. And so I was like, all right, I can use that. And then I can kind of like fade out the series. And then this year, the fall is a little different because we've got big things, right? We've got the end of the North Africa campaign in a couple of weeks. And then we've got planning and preparation for Operation Husky, which is Sicily, and that's in July and August. The Sicily campaign is only like 5 weeks, barely. And so I'm trying to plan a different type of like focused content for the big things. North Africa, not so much. Travel options for me because of my work. It's getting permission to go to North Africa was a little bit harder than getting permission to go to Sicily. And so, but Pixel, so people that know me, they might know Pixel, my dog. FC61, I see that. So that's the functional community. And that's just it's a group of historians that are focused on I think it's the same thing as the global war community of interest, or there's overlap there, but it's just a bunch of historians, and that's what their community is called. That's a CMH term. I'm not sure because I don't work for CMH. I can't really explain it. I just know that that's what they are.
And people are saying, that there's no Eastern Front content, but I mean, obviously, when you're talking about when you had Paul Sparrow on, for example, talking about FDR and Churchill, the Eastern Front ends up becoming part of those conversations because the decisions being made by the Allies about what they're going to do in the Mediterranean, they are taking what's happening on the Eastern Front as influence about what they're doing. So, but again, you could go down another entire path and start doing a comparative set of threads about, by the way, what's happening on the Eastern Front, by the way, what's happening in shipping, what's happening, and it would, you'd burn out very quickly.
Right. So that's my bandwidth is definitely a concern. So I'm covering the ETO, and with the ETO, the Mediterranean, North Africa, as well as the American home front, and that includes the occasional Pacific topic if it's like in Alaska or the Aleutian Islands, because I've had a couple there. And so, I mean, that's a lot, and I can barely cover. I'm barely scratching the surface on that. I decided not to cover the Eastern Front, and the most important reason is because I don't have the bandwidth, but also because I did not want to be telling Russian and Soviet history in a positive way on on a U.S. Army account.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I had like these are considerations. It's just messaging considerations that I had to take into consideration with the podcast. So the Combined Arms Center and CMH and the Marine Corps Museum, they still put their labels on everything. They'll still put the labels on the logos on the podcast. They don't mind that. They don't mind the affiliation. I have basically 100% autonomy with everything. So it's no problem for us to talk about things on the podcast or for me to cover threads that are like that aren't exclusively U.S. Army history. You know, I have talked about things like some of the roundups in France and some of the Kelmno and things like that. I've talked about these things on these in the written content. And with the podcast, though, like yesterday, I recorded the first Navy history episode. So that's the first time that I will have Navy history in my series at all. It took me 3 years to get there, but we talk about the Atlantic, we talk about Europe, we talk about the Pacific a little bit. But it's like I needed somebody that could do that. And then I have a couple of people that are going to do Eastern Front topics, but more in the summer when like Kursk and everything is ending.
Well, brilliant stuff, and people are reacting very well to what you're saying today, and they're impressed by the scope of what you're trying to cover. And again, it's that reminder which we'll be going to be covering ourselves over our next 3 weeks. And what you're covering is that, again, I'm repeating myself, but that 12 months was monumental in terms of the events, and there's no let up. You know, one massive campaign ends, another one starts, and there's overlap as well because the shipping aspect, the Battle of the Mediterranean is still going on. And Yugoslavia, there's worries about Greece, there's worries about Turkey, there's worries about the Middle East. Again, the spider's web of things that connect to 42, 43 are enormous. And as Indian Idell says on his channel, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Right.
There's always some effect. An event happening somewhere else in the war is having some effect on the bit that we're focusing on, whether it's logistics, whether it's policy, whether it's where the nations are putting their resources, whatever it would be. So it's hard to know when to kind of cut off and say, okay, that rabbit hole is worth going down. That one is too much of a deviation from where we're trying to go with this. So bring it back to the fact you are working for on behalf of the military. So you have to, like talking about current the Russian situation today is something you have to be careful about talking about Soviets in World War II. In some ways, but because you have that, I'm not going to say constraint, but you have some rules of engagement. Does that in some ways make it easier? Because it does mean there are certain subjects that are off topic for you.
I wish that it did. So I have autonomy, but Paul, I'm really clever. And so I'm like, I set the rules. Like they have not given me they didn't tell me don't cover Russia. I said, I'm not going to. And here's why. And they had no problem with that. But there are some things that I really want to focus on. And so I'm trying to shape my research and the written content to allow for a stronger emphasis in certain parts of the year. And I'm also trying to somewhat corral the podcast guests into, all right, let's cover these topics, but let's cover it this way instead of the way that you're proposing. So I am doing that a little bit, but like Operation Husky in Sicily is going to be a big one. I'm going to probably cover. There's probably going to be like 4 or 5 episodes of the podcast for that, plus like 5 weeks of threads, and I'm taking Pixel. We're going to go to Sicily, get a bunch of footage for that. And then in the summer, we're going to go to Rome, Naples, Salerno, and get footage for that so that I can cover Italy in the early fall. And then probably going to go back to Naples and a few other parts in October so that I can get like fall like footage for when we cover later in the year. So Italy, Sicily, Italy, obviously big, but like Naples, right? Naples, I thought offered a good opportunity to include more recent history comparisons, because as the Germans, anybody that knows this, as the Germans were pulling further north, back retreating out of Italy, they were causing a bunch of damage. They were setting some explosives. They blow up a post office in Naples, kill some people. And I looked at that and it was like, this is an awful lot like COIN, counterinsurgency, urban warfare, irregular warfare. These are things that I worked with at MCTP. And so I'm like, let's do some kind of, let me get somebody that can talk about this from a modern perspective, and I can tell the story, but we can get that modern perspective. The damage that the Germans caused also made it difficult for like the local population to maintain hygiene and things like health and hygiene. So there's a typhus outbreak. And so I got Army medical historians talking about that too, and how the Army helped mitigate that typhus outbreak. Is it the most important story? No, but I feel like it was a good way to show the relevance of Army medicine, you know.
Well,
And
that's where you're slightly different with your aims. Understand from what I'm doing is that you are. It's in your interests to connect things with the part present, to connect things with the experiences of the serving soldiers and airmen and sailors who are watching your content, to make it feel relevant to them. Because as you said, you're not aiming at people who necessarily have a huge interest in history, whereas the crowd I've now assembled on World War II TV, they are unashamedly World War II history buffs, the great majority of them. They just devour the content, and they're happy to understand that there are connections with the modern world as well. But it's all about the past in some ways, whereas you've got to keep one foot in the past, but also one foot in the present, because you say you're representing organizations that are active in the present as well as being active in the past.
Yeah. I do see the question, does Pixel have to be sedated on the plane? No, he does not. And so I have to pay a little bit extra for my ticket. I can't fly like cheap Ryanair flights. I have to go Lufthansa or KLM, I think, in order to take him in cabin. But he and I will go, and he will go in cabin. He's got his carrier. He's really good at, he's actually very travel friendly. And he has a car seat too. So I'll rent a car so we can see the whole island, because there'll be an awful lot. It's like 9 days. I'm not messing around. And so I'll bring his car seat. It collapses. I can put it in my luggage. But there will be video, pictures, and there will be pixel friendly content for all of that as well.
Cool. So yeah, well, we ought to just kind of begin to kind of wrap things up. I really enjoy talking to you, and it's been a bit of a nice sprawling conversation, which is fun. So let's talk about what you're perhaps skip on a couple of slides and talk about where you're going with the Husky thing, and also what you're looking for, because obviously you're looking for you're looking for more people to watch you and engage with you and start spreading the word, but also you're looking for more, like I am, you're looking for more papers and presenters and content as well.
Right. So I do have this is just an example of like this is only the official organizations that are involved in the podcast this year. I got the National Museum of the Marine Corps, the Krulak Center, which is a Marine Corps organization, the U.S. Army Transportation Museum, 45th Infantry Division, and the museum, that's the Oklahoma National Guard, 1st Infantry Division, 1st Division Museum at Cantini Park, the FDR Museum and Library, George C. Marshall Foundation and Library. I've got a historian from the Smithsonian, the Department of Military History at CGSC, that's the Command and General Staff College, the Military History Department at West Point. I've got an Air Force historian from the Air Force Academy. I've got the Army War College, Navy War College, the Air Force War College, the Army University Press, their staff ride team, Air University Teaching Learning Center, SAMS, which is the School of Advanced Military Studies. The Air Force equivalent of that is the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, which is it's a really cool acronym. They just go SAS. And I'm like, that's all right. Yeah. Several historians from the National World War II Museum, that's the American National World War II Museum, plus active duty leaders. I've got a deputy commander from a PSYOP a PSYOP group. I got a civil affairs guy that's going to join. People from AFRICOM, the U.S. Army Europe, and Africa, TRADOC, which is a training and doctrine command. One of their military history and heritage office is going to be contributing, the Army Medical Center of Excellence. And it's like, this is just the official people. I've also got Philip Blood. I've got a handful of RAF historians, British Army historians, Canadian Army historians, and just like people all over, it's like, so, but I also have friends. I have one friend that contributed a story on Hollywood. He looked at movies that he liked, and he talked about the influence that Hollywood and these movies had in connection with the war effort, and the influence that the war had as well. And that's an episode that I still have to edit. I'm a little bit behind, but yeah, I mean, if there's somebody that really wants to contribute, all I need is a place to, I'll tell you in 1 second. All I need, I'm looking at the questions, getting distracted. All I need is a way to anchor it in 1943, because that's what I'm on now. I have people signing up already for 1944 and 1945. When I get to next year, I'm trying to do something special for the Battle of the Bulge. So obviously we've got Normandy and everything like that, and I'll do the big things, but I want to end the series in 24 a little bit early and do a daily thing for December and January, covering every day of the Battle of the Bulge. And I'm working on something for that, but we'll get to it another time.
Well, what's interesting is that there is now a feeling I'm finding amongst historians that using social media reaches a different audience than writing books does and speaking at military conferences, and potentially an almost limitless audience. In that there's a sense I've found with dealing with the people I do that there's a kind of a bit of a closed system. Is that the same kind of people go to the same kind of conferences, and they see each other at multiple conferences during the year. They present their papers, and the people there watching the papers being presented are the same people who'll be at the next conference in a different state or a different country 2 months later. And as fascinating and brilliant as it all is, it's not reaching that wider audience. And I think even with the sales of books, the popular historians, the James Hollands, the Peter Caddick Adams, the John McManuses, there's a certain type of people who buy and read books, either or they at the library, but there's an audience out there who are using TikTok and Twitter and YouTube for their understanding of the past. And I think it's important that people like yourselves, and Brad is watching today from On This Day, Canadian Military History, is that we are bringing history in a different way that is another means of consuming it. So how important is it to you that we are embracing these different types of technology? And, when I introduce myself to people now as I'm a YouTuber, people say, what do you do now? You're not really guiding. I say, I'm a YouTuber. And YouTuber comes with I feel a negative connotation. People think you're like you're 12 and you're either talking about skateboards or makeup or makeup on skateboards. But I go, no, I'm talking about history. And they go, really? I didn't know that was a thing. They think of YouTubers as something for the kids, so to speak.
You could be doing makeup and history on a skateboard.
I could do. Yeah, that's a whole niche area I've not thought about going into.
But it's an untapped market.
Wear eyeliner back in my punk days, back when I was 18, 19, did a little bit of eyeliner, but that was no, folks, there are no photos of me with eyeliner and spiky hair.
It's an untapped market. No, so for me, right, I am literally, you can't see it, I'm literally surrounded by books. And I moved here in the late summer 2021, and most of my stuff is still in storage, and most of my stuff is books. So I have bought second copies of books that are still in the States. Mark Calhoun. I came here with Mark Calhoun's book on on Leslie McNair. So that was in my luggage.
I've got that one.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, people read, I read books. I do not read all the books. I get audiobooks for a lot of them if they're available. If I get a little distracted sometimes. And if I struggle to read something, but I need to get through it, I'll record myself with my phone and then I'll listen to it again later, and it'll help keep it in my head. But a lot of people don't have the time for that. And a lot of people aren't going to commit 30, 40 hours, 50 hours a week like I do to research. Um, but I'm trying to help people get that information. Not all of it. They're never going to know everything that's in the book. I'm not going to be able to do that, but I can share an awful lot of the story, and if I present it in a way that's maybe entertaining, some of it might stick.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Your threads on Twitter and the Twitter threads, particularly, or the other social media things, is that you've done the process of taking out the important bits. You bring a little bit of humor in it. You connect the threads connect. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And at the end of it, you've learned something. Now, sometimes the subject you cover, I know a bit more already than what you're covering, and other times I know a lot less. And it doesn't really matter. The thing is, it is very hard. There are people watching who I've met on tour here who are kind of still fairly new to World War II. They're still fairly at an early stage of their understanding the history. And it's monumentally scary when you look at how many books there are on a subject like the Battle of the Bulge or the Italian campaign or the Pacific naval operations, and you go, where the hell do I start? How on earth can I begin to get my foot in the door and understand this? And that's where podcasts, Twitter threads, and YouTube can help. They're a gateway drug, I suppose, is the positive way of looking at it.
No, so a lot of where I start is with, was it here? With these. I start with the Army Green books, which are, there's tons and tons of them. Now, even CMH will tell you, oh, you read them? They're so dry. They're not dry. They're not dry. They're written in plain language. They're relatively easy to read.
Yep.
And they cover everything. And these are official histories. The Air Force has a smaller set of blue books. Like that's like all of the blue books. And this is just a fraction of the green books. So, but it's all of them.
The thing about the green books, I have them online more than actually the hard. I've got a couple of them. I've got the hard. Is that there's no frills in the writing. They don't describe the color of the sky or where. It's just this unit did this. Its objective was that. It kicked off at that. This was the commanding officer, and they did this, and the result was this. It's bare bones history, but it's really efficient to then build on. To then go, okay, so now I can distill that and add a little bit of drama, add a little bit of flourish to it to take those stories out and make them more digestible for a broad audience. But yeah, they're a very good starting point.
Yeah, no. So because it's Army history that I've started with, then I check to see what was covered in the official histories that the Army has put out. Now for Sicily, right? They have it's like 700 pages on Sicily and the surrender. I've actually got it right here. It's Sicily and the surrender of Italy. Now I paid to. Am I still there?
Yeah, I thought you were going to hold up a book, so I put on your screen for a second. No, yeah,
I was. So this is just the front. This is just the first half of it. I had it printed and bound. They also have one that's like 30 pages, and it's just on the Sicily. There it is, just on Sicily, and so it's like 700 pages. I went and I had them printed and bound so that I could write in them. You don't have to do that, but they're all available online as PDF, so it's free. For free stuff, it's a good place to start. I also printed a whole bunch of maps and had them laminated because I'm a history nerd and also like an Army doctrine and history nerd. So I did that. But again, I don't get any funding and I won't monetize my content as long as the Army's putting their name on it. So, I don't recommend it. And then I picked a couple of books to help with my Sicily research. I got Bitter Victory by Carlo d'Asti and James Holland's Sicily 43. And I'm using these plus one other Sicily book to kind of shape my research because my trip is going to be, I need to know, I need to make sure that in those 9 days that I'm in Sicily that I'm getting the right things and that I understand what I'm looking at and taking video and pictures of while I'm there, because I can continue the research after while I'm editing that content for July and August. But I don't want to waste those 9 days.
I've got footage from my trip to Sicily that I haven't done anything with. That was God, 4 years ago now. I've got footage of Primasoli Bridge and Kent, where else I went to, the cemeteries and around
Yeah.
Syracuse. I haven't really done much with it yet, but it sits in the pile. I will use some of it when I do my Husky series in July. But we will. People are recommending
Are we
Mark's
in
book on Operation
competition?
Husky from the Canadian perspective.
They're recommending what?
Mark Zelke's book, Operation Husky, for the Canadian perspective.
Yeah. So I don't have that one yet. It is on my list. I was going to include it. But yeah, I will include a Canadian perspective in the Sicily content, but it's probably going to be more in the podcast than in the written content because bandwidth. But the trip, I started out with an army staff ride concept, and I figure that Pixel and I, we can go into Catania where the main airport is, drive down to about Syracuse, and we'll change hotels and stuff, and then see the British landing sites, and then head west and see the American landing sites, the airborne landing, and just about everything else, and basically go around the island. But I want to make sure that I hit some things in the middle too, because there was some important stuff there. But I also want to make sure that I see as many of the monuments. I've got them all listed out too. I am a planning nerd too. So yeah, it's kind of insufferable, but it's good if you like it. So a lot of the monuments and memorials, but I also want to talk about the the Sicilian people, because that's an island, and they had the Italian and German forces there, and then they had Allied forces there, and then the Italians and Germans left. Well, the Italian forces and Germans, they left or they surrendered, and now the Allies have Sicily, right? And so it's like, what was that like for the Sicilian people?
Yeah, another aspect doesn't get talked about. Yeah. And as you said, a swift campaign, and the Allies didn't leave much of a presence in Sicily. Once they left, it was all into Italy. The bases of operations, they were still using Tunisia and other bases for some time, but Sicily kind of got left in ruins, and that's not the whole subject in it for another day, really. But we will begin to wrap things up. It's been great talking to you. We will have you back again. But anything else you want to get across to the WW2 TV crowd about how they can help, or what you're aiming for, or why they should be listening to you, watching you, whatever?
So if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Mother of Tanks. It's separated by underscores, and I do pay the ridiculous monthly fee, so I have a little blue check mark, just so that you know that one is mine. It does have a link to my website that's got links to all of the social media accounts on it. I'm rubbing. I'm sorry, I'm not rubbing noses in it. If you want to come along, you're welcome. In a couple of years, I might start doing come do mill history nerd shit with Mother of Tanks in Europe events.
That'd be cool. Yeah. I'll sign up for that. Mark Calhoun would sign up for that. We'd all sign up for that. It would be if a busload of military historians went somewhere, the conversations would never end, would they? It would just go on about. But what about this? And what if they that? What if they'd gone via that hill? What if they should? It would have been never ending. But
yeah. Okay, so Mother of Tanks on just about everything. If you want to follow me, it's Sasha Maggio. My links are everywhere too.
They're all in the description below. I made that clear earlier on.
The podcast, so the Twitter threads are Tuesdays on my account and Saturdays on the Combined Arms Center account. And the podcast is not on a schedule, so I release them as often as possible. But you can find it just about anywhere. Just search Why We Fight, and it'll be Why We Fight 1943.
Brilliant. Well, what I think we'll do is we'll have you back in again in the Husky week I'm doing, and we can discuss where you are with that, and we can, or I could come on yours, or we could do a team one or something. But it's been really great talking to you.
We could do a team one.
And the perils and pitfalls of YouTubing and creating content. I think people just see the finished product sometimes. I'm not doing a sob story for people there, but they don't see how much effort goes into it. They don't see how my inboxes are just overflowing sometimes, and keeping up to date with the comments. And of course, as you get more successful, more and more comments come in, and I try and respond to the questions there, and it's never ending. But ultimately, it's really rewarding because I feel that I am like you are. You're helping people understand the past, and understanding the past helps you understand the present, I think.
100%. And if anybody had questions that we missed, because I wasn't seeing all of them, I mean, most of my accounts are open, so please feel free.
Brilliant. Well, we'll leave it there. So great. It's been great talking to you, Sasha, and I'm glad we got it arranged eventually, because we've been communicating back and forth for what seems like ages now. But
I think you asked me at the beginning of last year if I'd come on, and then it took me until like a year to get back to you, because
something like that. But whatever. I'm glad we did it. So, folks, I'll be back again tomorrow. We're talking about 30 AU with Dave Roberts. Tomorrow we talked about 30 Assault Unit in Normandy. Tomorrow we're doing the North Africa show. Then we continue with a look at the spies and espionage in Casablanca with Meredith Hindley. We've got shows coming up about tanks. We've got shows coming up about the Navy, Vincent O'Hara, you name it. They're coming on the channel over the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on it all, and keep an eye on the fact that sometimes the timers are not the usual 7 p.m. UK time. So just keep an eye. And that's why it's always good to have the notifications on, so you receive information about updated shows. But thank you very much, Sasha.
Thank you
everybody
for
watching. I will see you all tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye.